Why hello, my fellow apes. I hope you are well. I know that this is a little bit of a different atmosphere. I'm in Austin, Texas. It's been amazing. I'm at the Faithless Forum using one of their side rooms to be able to record right now. I've just given a speech. It was amazing. I really enjoyed it, but we had to turn the lights down so that people could see the presentation. And consequently, when I recorded, well, the quality was pretty poor. So I thought, am I going to upload this to YouTube, or should I go into a side room and record just for you so you get a bit more of a better presentation? Let's take the latter, right? Let's do this. So what you're about to see is basically a rerun of what I've just given 15 minutes ago on stage. I hope you enjoy it. It is wonderful, awesome to be back at the Faithless Forum, and it has been incredible interacting with everyone here, networking with people, developing relationships, hearing people's stories. It's been truly awesome. But the fact that anyone turned up this morning is quite frankly a miracle, because we were partying last night. And as theists tell us again and again, miracles are more expected on theism than they are on atheism, so therefore by turning up they were actually helping the theists out. That seems legit. Anyhow, I was thinking, what do I want to do with 15 minutes? 15 minutes is not a lot of time. There's only so much that one can achieve with 15 minutes. So what I thought is, let's just debunk theism. Every argument for God's existence debunked in 15 minutes. However, I have just wasted a minute on small talk, and so I only have 14 minutes left. But there you go, there's the new title, Theism Debunked in 14 Minutes. First of all, however, I have to put down a trigger warning for theists, you see, because there is no way that I could possibly, in any possible world, address every defense of every premise for every argument for God's existence in 14 minutes. And so just chill, we're having a good time. This is meant to just be a bit of fun. And that also goes out to our friendly neighborhood agnostic, Joe Schmid. I don't want to see a 40,000 essay, Joe, okay? Just chill. Let's start with everyone's favorite argument for God. And if this isn't your favorite argument for God, then you're wrong. It's the argument that asserts that if you can think of it, it's real. I call it the imagination game, but you may know it as the ontological argument. Allow me to demonstrate. I have produced here for you the greatest possible presentation. If this, the greatest possible presentation, did not exist, then you could produce a greater possible presentation. But you cannot produce a greater possible presentation than this, the greatest possible presentation. Hence, this is the greatest possible presentation. Checkmate, you neckbeard atheists. You see, the ontological argument treats existence as if it's an attribute, and then reasons that God must have this attribute since he is, by definition, the greatest possible being. Yes, I know this is philosophical masturbation at its finest. Objections. So there was this guy called Guanilo, and Guanilo existed at the same time as Anselm. He was a contemporary of Anselm. And what he did is he went, look, bro, we can just replace the word the greatest possible being, the term the greatest possible being, with the greatest possible island. And then we're going to have the greatest possible island. If you now think of an island and it's perfect for you, you're thinking it's got cookies, it's got Seth Andrews narrating your life, whatever it might be, but you don't have existence as part of the island's definition, then, well, I can think of a greater island, namely the one that you've just described, but with the addition of existence. It's better to exist than not exist. That's the general thrust, of course, and it works just as much for island. It also works for an evil being. The greatest possible evil being would be one that necessarily exists. And if you read the Bible, I actually think that evil being is a better description of God than a good being. Or this is my favorite one, we can say that we can conceive of the worst possible argument, and quite frankly, the ontological argument competes for that, may even be it. We can, if we like, instead take a page out of Kant's book and point out that existence is not a predicate. Existence is not an attribute, but rather that which attributes apply to. And in doing so, we can reject premise 2. Given the time, I've only got 15 minutes, 14 minutes as I said, we need to get through this quicker, so let's move on. All right. For this next argument, we need to go back to the 18th century, which I'm sure you'll agree I did when I arrived in Texas a few days ago. Out there, they were just pure sport about it. It was awesome. I was worried. They've got guns. I was like, oh my goodness, can I drop this joke? No, it's good. It's good. Anyway, here we go. Premise 1. I can tell that this pocket watch is a product of intelligence because of its sheer complexity. And it's got absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that watches don't breed. Premise 2. You know what? I hope it's fairly clear that I'm a little bit more complex than this watch. Conclusion, therefore, I have someone who winds me up when I stop. Now, this argument is entirely won or lost on the first premise, which Paley and other proponents of intelligent design bolster with analogical reasoning. What they say is, whenever we see complexity, we immediately recognize it as something consciously created by an intelligent being. Now, to be fair to Billy, his argument was based on a genuine gap in our knowledge. We did not know how nature could conjure this kind of complexity. So, fair enough, I can see why people were convinced of this. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think that the watchmaker analogy is the absolute best argument that theism has ever had. I totally get it. It's a very intuitive, powerful argument. However, there's this thing called evolution by natural selection that precisely explains how complexity can emerge naturally. Because of this, we know that the first premise is wrong and that the analogy is obviously false. It can't be correct because we know the first premise is wrong. We've got a rebutting defeater. Evolution by natural selection demonstrates how complexity can emerge naturally. But even before Darwin's voyage, Paley's argument was still and is an argument from ignorance because he asserted that the proposition of complexity emerging naturally must be false since we didn't know, in his time, of any complex things emerging naturally. David Hume, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and a few other clever cats were able to notice the appeal to ignorance fallacy, but most didn't, unfortunately. Now, there was a lesson to be learnt here, right? Don't just jump on something where we have no examples of the contrary and then assert that we cannot have examples of the contrary. Big mistake, don't do it again. So they did it again. Now, I'm pleased to say that most of the people out there knew who this wonderful chap is. It's John Adams, the second president of the United States. And my favorite quote from him is that mystery is made a convenient cover for absurdity. Theists, my fellow apes, love mystery, for mystery is the safe space for God. The Origin of Species wasn't published until 2 decades after Adams lived, and so he had to deal with people treating complexity as if it's super mysterious. But as soon as complexity was no longer seen as mysterious, theists needed a new safe space for God, a new God of the gaps. And they found it. What they've done is they've taken the watchmaker analogy and replaced complexity with language and organisms with the genetic code. Boom. Checkmate, once again, game over, atheist, you're going to hell. And for the record, language here is defined as a signal-based communication system, and the genetic code certainly qualifies per this definition. John Perry, I can hear you out there telling me, get this across to the atheist community, I'm with you. And not surprisingly, proponents of this argument employ the same analogical reasoning as Paley did. They say that whenever we see language, we immediately recognize the symbols as something consciously written by an intelligent being. Okay, objections, let's get to it. Some of us have learned from history what an argument from ignorance is. Why is this an argument from ignorance? Well, it's because proponents are asserting that the proposition of language emerging naturally must be false, since we don't know how language can emerge naturally. It's precisely the same thing that was happening with the watchmaker analogy. And here's a second objection. We can approach it via coevolution. Language, as defined as a signal-based communication system, is the product of evolution by natural selection. For instance, plants signal to bees that they have nectar and pollen, and bees then carry pollen to other plants. And because of this, both of their survival chances increase. Definitely got to move on because I'm running out of time. I've got 6,000 slides to go through. Hopefully we can make it. Cosmological argument. When Thomists employ this argument, or indeed anything from Summa Theologia, they tend to insist on potentially wrapping their actual being of an argument in potential actualization for mysterious actual potential, but we ain't going to do this because we are Anglais. Capiche? Here it is in a nutshell. Premise 1. Everything that exists has a cause. Premise 2. The universe exists. Conclusion. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Proponents defend the first premise via inductive reasoning. They say, look, every existing thing we know of has a cause, and so we can assume that, probably, all existing things have a cause. They dress this up in Bayesian language normally as well. That's becoming quite popular in apologetic circles. So how do we respond to this? There's so many ways. Here's one. We can just point out that this is a black swan fallacy. For millennia, it was universally accepted that all swans are white. In fact, this truth was so incontrovertible that logicians would often use it to illustrate the process of deductive reasoning. Yes, all existing things seem to have a cause, but maybe in certain conditions there's a black swan. There is existing things that don't have causes. Maybe. But fair enough, the intuition is still pretty strong, so we'll try a different objection. What about this? We could say, no, everything that exists has an explanation, but not necessarily a cause. A cause is a very specific type of explanation. If I had 12 apples and I wanted to hand out one apple to every single person that was in that crowd, I couldn't do it because there was more than 12. Thus, the explanation obviously had nothing to do with causation at all. Likewise, if we asked, why is there something rather than nothing, the big Leibniz question, and we answered it by saying that it's because nothing is a human abstract, and thus it's not possible, then we have an explanation for existing things that is not a cause. Or we can do this. This is one of my favorite ways to approach it. We could just bite the bullet and say, fair enough. But what this means is that God, being an existing thing, has a cause. Just follows. To which theists respond, no, God is special. The problem, however, is that any reason they give for God's speciality can be applied with fewer assumptions and fewer ontological commitments to the universe itself. For instance, if they say that God is unlimited in power, we can say that the universe is unlimited in power. If they say that God is necessary, we can say that the universe is necessary, and again with fewer ontological commitments. Hence, they're special pleading for God. They're asserting that God is an exception to a rule without adequate justification. Now, given this problem of special pleading, theists had a great idea. They thought, instead of saying that everything that exists has a cause, how about we just say that everything that begins to exist has a cause? Then they've got their second premise, the universe began to exist, and their conclusion, therefore the universe has a cause. Where to start? Okay, proponents tend to defend the first premise by arguing for the impossibility of actual infinites. For instance, the Islamic scholar Al-Ghazali emphasized that if the universe had existed forever, then despite Saturn taking 30 times longer than the Earth to orbit the Sun, both have completed the same number of orbits. Infinite. And in recent years, William Lane Craig has expressed these same absurdities through the prism of Hilbert's Hotel. It's the same argument, just more abstract. Alright, let's get to objections, because I am well and truly running out of time. Al-Ghazali's rotations and Hilbert's Hotel are simply vertical paradoxes. They produce results that seem absurd, but nevertheless are true. It's like the Monty Hall problem. They work against our intuitions. Any set with Cantor's property is going to yield unintuitive results. And once you wrap your head around set theory, these absurdities are simply not a problem. Infinite sets have weird properties. Get over it, like the overwhelming majority of mathematicians and philosophers have. Now, another prominent defense of this premise in recent years has come from Alex Proust, Robert Koons, and Josh Rasmussen. And what they are saying is that causal finitism is true. Causal finitism is the thesis that nothing can have an infinite causal history. Or in other words, there cannot be infinitely many causes affecting one target state, substance, or event. And to illustrate this, a priori, no less, from an armchair, theists will employ supposed paradoxes such as the Grim Messenger paradox. We haven't the time to be able to get into any of these paradoxes. I'm running out of time completely. But because the Grim Messenger paradox is their choice weapon, it's the one that they put forward, we can just simply point out that it is not, in fact, a paradox, but rather a logical inconsistency. It's just difficult to recognize it. If you need more help on this, watch my debate with Cameron Bertuzzi. I spell it out, and I go deeply into the works of Nicholas Schackel. So check that out. Next up, we have, I humbly state, the most eye-rolling argument of them all. Thanks again, Craig. The moral argument. It goes like this. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Premise 2, objective moral values do exist. Conclusion, therefore, God exists. Objections. Well, we could take the anti-realist position and simply state, no, objective moral values and duties do not exist, and in doing so, reject premise 2. Get over it, bucko. Or, if you believe that morality is objective, you can do this. In Plato's dialogue, Euthyphro, Socrates asked Euthyphro, is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? Or in other words, is something morally good loved by God because it's morally good, or is it morally good simply because God says so? Well, if it's morally good just because God says so, then morality is not morality at all. It's might makes right. That's it. It's about whether or not you can live up to the arbitrary whims of this celestial dictator. That's not morality. Not at all. However, on the other hand, if they say that it's morally good in and of itself, then morality obviously supersedes God, and thus we can reject the first premise. Now, I have 6,235 slides left to go, but I'm out of time, so I'm going to have to call it. As I just said out there, it's been amazing at Faithless Forum. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope that you on YouTube enjoy this. It's been really, really fun. Again, it's been somewhat facetious, but yeah, just thanks for your time. Much love all. Oh, and finally, I do want to say an extra special thank you to my patrons, because that's how I finance my ability to get here. Thank you for your support, and thank you for enabling me to be able to take on these arguments from an atheist perspective, hopefully helping you have good responses and good resources and to be able to respond to these arguments. So yeah, on that note, just thank you very much.